Flexible dieters often have it wrong. When I say that, I mean a lot of people follow a flexible dieting structure, which isn't actually in keeping with what the literature says. Here to help explain, someone who wrote her master's thesis on the psychology of eating behaviour.
Oh, hi! Great. Flexible dieting, often associated with the term if it fits your macros, or IIFYM, is characterized by the notion that you can lose weight eating whatever foods you want, including junk food, as long as it fits your allotted calories and macros. Although this is a relatively common thought process now, it came at a time when it was the polar opposite of how a lot of people lost weight. Bodybuilding and fitness culture was synonymous with extremely restrictive diets. Chicken and broccoli, egg whites and oats, all that jazz. In this respect, the IIFYM culture was important in that it taught people that no foods had to be off limits. The most commonly supported research indeed concludes that flexible dieting is superior to rigid dieting, both in terms of lower BMI scores, as well as lower eating disorder symptoms and behaviors.
However, the common implementation of IIFYM doesn't actually follow what the literature says. For example, extreme IIFYM proponents are often seen meticulously weighing every single mouthful of food on a precise food scale, tracking everything they eat to the nearest gram, and trying to hit precise numbers spat out at them by an online calorie calculator. But where in the literature are these behaviours included within the definition of flexible dieting? If we look at what the research literature actually says, flexible dieting has nothing to do with meticulous food weighing at all. It's not inherently negative, and it might be an appropriate behaviour for some people, but it's just not in keeping with the flexible dieting literature that some people blindly quote. Here's an example. Let's take one of the most commonly cited papers in support of flexible dieting. An IIFYM abstract warrior would see this sentence and probably get a hard on. But the very next sentence says this. How many of you consider yourselves to be flexible dieters but also count calories? Similarly, if we flip to another commonly cited paper, this sentence in the abstract looks exciting. But let's dig deeper. If you actually look through the full text, here are the questionnaires that they used. And if you look at those specific questionnaires, here are some example questions. I have a pretty good idea of the number of calories in common food. I count calories as a conscious means of controlling my weight. Without a diet plan, I wouldn't know how to control my weight. Do you consider yourself to be a flexible dieter? And answered yes to any of these questions. Because a lot of hardcore IIFYM folk would have. But these are actually in the section for rigid control, not flexible control.
This brings us to the crux of our argument. Flexible versus rigid dieting in the literature is actually more about the mindset rather than the actual behaviors. A lot of flexible dieters think that because they understand macros and because they know how to fit precisely measured portions of junk food into their diet, that this makes them exempt from the negative side effects of rigid dieting. Sure, they might understand energy balance, and perhaps they believe they've found food freedom because they're no longer bound by a very short list of acceptable foods. But what's happened is now they're no longer imprisoned by food choice, but by food number. So they can absolutely eat that cupcake guilt-free as long as they know the exact calorie and macronutrient breakdown of it. They can finally go to their favorite pizza restaurant, but only if the nutrition info is supplied.
These are common examples of people escaping the guilt associated with clean eating, but instead swapping it with guilt associated with not precisely hitting their numbers. For example, how many flexible dieters do you know who can eat a bowl of Cocoa Pops without any guilt, but if you took their food scales away, they would flip their shit? Flexible in one regard, but rigid in another.
What are the take-home points? In terms of the literature, flexible dieting or flexible control consistently shows better outcomes, including lower BMI, absence of overeating, and lower levels of anxiety and depression.
But precisely weighing every single thing that you eat just isn't seen in the definition of flexible dieting when you look at the research papers. And food weighing is not bad per se, some people love it.
Be careful that you don't become so obsessed with flexible dieting that you are no longer flexible about it.
Flexible dieting might not mean what you think it means. Just some food for thought.